the best commentaries from the last video. Subscribe to see more stories.
For as long as I can remember, my life was made up of calm, comforting routines. I'm Michael Sullivan, and each morning I woke up feeling secure, believing my world was built on years of shared memories and an unbreakable bond with my wife, Clara. I trusted that our steady daily life proved our lasting love, a love that had survived time and hardships. Yet, I soon found out that beneath that familiar surface lay a maze of secrets waiting to be discovered. It was on a late autumn afternoon that the illusion began to break apart. I returned home earlier than usual, hoping for a quiet moment of solitude before the evening began. As I stepped into our silent house, I sensed a strange tension in the air. There was no sign of Clara's usual warmth or the inviting smile I had come to expect. Instead, a disturbing stillness filled every room, hinting that something was wrong. As I wandered into the living room, my eyes landed on an object that shattered the fragile calm, a sleek, unfamiliar smartphone lying unnoticed on a side table piled with mail. I had never seen this device before, and it was certainly not something Clara had ever mentioned owning. With equal parts fear and curiosity, I picked it up. In that moment, my heart started to race as I turned it on, not knowing what hidden truths might come to light. The screen lit up with a rush of messages, personal, heartfelt, and all addressed to a man whose name I had never heard Clara mention. Each notification peeled back another layer of a secret life she had carefully hidden. At first, the messages were light and teasing, full of playful banter and warm emojis. But as I scrolled further, their tone changed. They became more intense, loaded with emotion and detailed plans for secret meetings. I saw discussions about future adventures and even hints of a new life planned without me. Every word hurt, unraveling the trust one had so carefully built around our marriage. I stood frozen in disbelief, struggling to deal with the sudden flood of betrayal. The comfort of our familiar life, the little habits we shared, everything was suddenly tainted by the realization that she had kept a secret for years. Knowing that Clara's loyalty was nothing more than a clever facade left me numb. In that moment, I began to question every shared memory, the unexplained absences, the small shifts in her behavior, and the excuses that now seemed empty. A rush of feelings, anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal, filled my mind. I could almost hear my own doubts echo, each one reminding me of how much I had taken our love for granted. But even amid all that pain, a cold determination began to form. I refused to let this deception rule my life. I needed to face it, to find out the full extent of the betrayal, and to understand the man involved in this web of lies with my wife. Once the initial shock faded, I decided to do something I never imagined I would. I planned a meeting with the mysterious man from the messages. This was not a rash act of revenge, but a desperate search for the truth, a way to pull back the curtain on the years of lies that had seeped into my life. I knew that confronting him would force me into a role I had never played before. I would need to pretend to be Clara, copying her texting style and even her mannerisms, to coax him into revealing the full scope of their hidden world. The challenge ahead was intimidating. I spent days examining every detail in the messages, the way she chose her words, the small emojis that softened her tone, and the exact timing of their secret chats. It became clear that this was no brief affair, it was a long-term, well-planned deception woven into our daily lives. The man on the other end was not just a fleeting lover, he was a key part of a story that had been unfolding quietly behind my back. In the quiet of my study, surrounded by reminders of a once-happy marriage, I began to form a plan. The idea was as bold as it was necessary, to meet him directly while posing as Clara. I practiced her voice in my head, studied the rhythm of her texts, and even tried to remember the exact phrases she often used. This impersonation wasn't just about getting revenge, it was my only way to force the truth out of a situation where every secret had been kept hidden. The following days blurred together in careful planning and deep reflection. I found myself rereading old messages and recalling our shared memories, trying to piece together how our love had slowly been overtaken by a secret life. It was hard to accept that my trust had been used by someone I never even knew existed. Every moment of reflection brought a painful truth: the betrayal was deeper and more organized than I ever imagined. Yet, amid all the chaos, a clear thought emerged. I realized that meeting this stranger was not only about regaining lost honor, it was about freeing myself from a past full of lies. I was determined to unravel every thread of this complicated deception, no matter how painful it might be. This meeting would force all the hidden truths into the open, leaving no space for doubt or half-truths. I had to know the entire story, even if it meant breaking apart everything I once held dear. The thought of meeting this man while pretending filled me with both fear and resolve. It felt like stepping into a different world, where every gesture and every word had a weight I was only beginning to understand. I remembered all the evenings spent in blissful ignorance, the moments of shared laughter, and the silent promises we once made. And now, every one of those memories was stained by the harsh truth of her unfaithfulness. The pressure of the coming confrontation grew with each passing moment. I knew the road ahead would be full of risks, both emotionally and practically, but it was a risk I had to take. Discovering that mysterious phone had forever changed how I saw the life I thought I knew. The journey toward the truth was uncertain, but it was one I had to follow, no matter where it led. As I got ready for the meeting, I couldn't help but notice the irony of it all. The man I once believed to be just a secret lover of my wife was now a major part of a deceitful story that had been unfolding in silence for years. By facing him, I wasn't only challenging the betrayal, but also questioning my own part in a marriage that was built on trust and respect. This confrontation was unavoidable, and as I took my first hesitant steps into a reality full of hard truths, I promised myself that nothing would stop me from uncovering every lie. So, with a mix of fear and strong determination, I put a plan into motion that would change the course of my life forever. I was ready to face the storm of revelations, even if it meant wearing a mask of deceit to expose the secrets hidden beneath our shattered illusion. After the shock of my discovery had faded, I set my plan in motion with a careful determination that felt almost unreal. My days and nights blended together as I prepared for the encounter that would eventually untangle the messy web of lies. My goal was clear: to arrange a meeting with the secret lover while pretending to be Clara, and to force him to reveal the long-hidden truth of our broken reality. I started by reaching out through the very channel that had once carried the tender messages between my wife and her hidden lover. Using Clara's familiar tone, I sent a simple message, layered with subtle hints, a request for a private meeting disguised as a casual catch-up, yet filled with an undercurrent of vulnerability and longing. Every word was carefully chosen, meant to lure him into a meeting that he could not ignore. To my surprise, he responded almost right away. His messages mixed warmth with nervousness, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. He introduced himself as Andy, a name that now held a double meaning in my mind, belonging to a man I had never met but who was clearly a major part of the drama that had unfolded in silence over the years. Andy's messages were full of anticipation. He talked about missing the closeness he once shared with Clara, the hope that they could bring back their secret moments, and even hinted at plans for a new life together, a life free from the burdens of the past. As the days went by, our conversation grew deeper. Andy's texts became more detailed, painting a picture of secret meetings, soft promises, and dreams built on the fragile hope of escape. I read every word with a cool detachment that hid the storm of feelings inside me. I couldn't help but notice how familiar his descriptions of events and emotions were. There was a closeness in his language that went beyond mere infidelity. It was as if Andy understood my very soul, a fact that began to unsettle me. On the day of our arranged meeting, I left with a heavy heart and a mind full of both hope and dread. I picked a quiet, upscale cafe hidden in a part of the city known for its quiet elegance, a place where soft voices and the gentle clinking of porcelain could hide whispered conversations. With every step toward the meeting spot, I practiced being Clara, imitating her mannerisms, her tone, the warmth that once defined her voice. This was not just an act, it was a disguise that promised to uncover truths long kept secret. When I arrived, I saw that Andy was already seated at a corner table, his eyes scanning the room as if waiting for a ghost from the past. He looked both nervous and determined, a mix that made his presence even more intriguing. I walked over and sat opposite him, forcing myself to adopt the calm, confident look that I believed Clara would have. In that moment, I felt both powerful and very exposed, a contradiction that fueled my resolve. Andy's eyes met mine with an intensity that revealed more than simple attraction. He greeted me with a hesitant smile, as if he wasn't sure whether he was seeing a long-lost lover or a stranger who looked uncannily familiar. We started our conversation with small talk. We discussed simple topics, the weather, the cafe's atmosphere, and memories of shared moments that I had carefully gathered from many past messages and recollections. Yet, underneath, every sentence carried an unspoken tension, and every pause hinted at a hidden truth. As our talk went on, I steered the conversation toward the real issue, the secret meetings, the promises of a new start. Andy's face changed slightly, a mix of longing and regret washing over him. "I've missed you so much," he said softly, his voice shaking with emotion. "Every time we talked, I felt like we were building something real, something that could change our lives." His words hit me hard, each one proving that this wasn't just a brief fling but a long-term affair, carefully maintained over the years. Then, unexpectedly, the conversation shifted. Andy began mentioning details that only someone who knew me very well could know. He spoke about my favorite cafe, the way I always ordered my drink, even recalling the specific book I was reading during one of our rare stolen moments. At that moment, the disguise I had so carefully maintained started to fall apart. How could Andy know so much about my life, knowledge that went far beyond a lover's casual interest? A cold thought struck me: this was no ordinary affair. The betrayal was mixed with an intimacy that had grown over the years, and the lines between friend and foe, lover and confidant, had become dangerously blurred. I found myself walking a tightrope between sympathy and careful manipulation. The deeper we talked, the more I sensed that Andy was not only deeply involved with Clara, but that he had also formed a strong connection with me, a connection I never expected. I gently pressed on, asking about moments he said were the peak of our shared intimacy. With each answer, his story became more detailed and more tied to the life I once knew. He recalled late-night drives, secret trips, and hushed talks in the dark corners of the city. All the while, I kept up my act, storing every detail like ammunition for the confrontation ahead. As the meeting ended, I leaned in and whispered a carefully planned suggestion, a hint that a new beginning might be possible if we were willing to take a chance. I saw a flicker of hope in Andy's eyes, soon replaced by a rising feeling of jealousy. He admitted that the idea of Clara moving on without him stirred a mix of possessiveness and desperation, a mix that I was quietly fanning into a burning flame. With each word we exchanged, the mask of secrecy began to crack further. I guided our conversation to bring out Andy's jealousy, playing on his insecurities until they became his driving force. The seed of doubt was planted. If Clara was truly meant to be with him, why was she letting me, the pretender, be here? The questions grew, and his confidence wavered as he tried to match his ideal view of our secret world with the emerging, conflicting reality. Before we said goodbye, I left him with a final, ambiguous remark, a promise that our next meeting would bring all the hidden truths to light. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Andy was falling deeper into the trap I had so carefully set, and that he was starting to question his own story. His eyes, filled with both hope and envy, carried the weight of a secret far more complicated than either of us had expected. Driving home that night, I replayed every moment of the meeting in my mind. The conversation had been a risky dance of words, feelings, and things left unsaid. It revealed not only the depth of Clara's betrayal but also the unexpected layers of connection that tied Andy to me. I realized that in my quest for the truth, I had become tangled in a web that stretched back years, a web woven with threads of deceit, longing, and careful manipulation. The meeting was a revelation, a mirror reflecting the deep cracks in our lives. It was now clear that the affair was not just a simple betrayal, but a long-term mix of emotions and deceptions, grown in the shadows of our everyday lives. And as I planned my next move, I knew the road ahead would require even more cleverness, for I had to use Andy's own weaknesses against him. His rising jealousy and the painful truths of our shared past would be the tools I needed to break apart the illusion that had held me captive for so long. In the days after our tense meeting, the weight of that conversation stayed with me like a heavy fog, making it hard to tell truth from lies. I went back to my daily routine, yet every familiar move and ordinary task was now clouded by the careful plan slowly unfolding in my mind. I knew I had set off a chain of events that would force Andy to face his deepest feelings, and in doing so, start to break down his connection with Clara. I began by contacting Andy again, this time mixing cautious friendliness with a touch of bold vulnerability. My goal was to nurture the fragile seed of jealousy I had already planted, helping it grow into a force strong enough to overwhelm any remaining loyalty he had for Clara. Every message I sent was chosen with care, each sentence meant to spark a reaction, to remind him of the closeness he once shared with her while quietly questioning how real that bond truly was. At first, our messages were slow and measured, almost routine. Andy replied with hesitation that showed his inner struggle. I could tell that behind his calm look, doubts were growing. I knew I had to raise the tension slowly, like a conductor building up to a strong note in a song of betrayal. So, I started casually mentioning that Clara had been spotted in familiar places without him. I talked about her attending social events and meeting up with mutual friends, a fact he had once accepted without doubt. Now, each mention served as a reminder that his world was changing. One evening, I asked Andy to meet at a quiet spot, a dimly lit lounge known for its cozy corners and quiet talks. I told him I had something important to share, something only the two of us could understand. Sitting across from him in that secluded place, I saw his usually confident eyes flicker with uncertainty. He gripped his coffee cup like it was a lifeline, and I could feel that my words were beginning to crack the wall of certainty he had built around his relationship with Clara. I started with a casual remark, "Have you ever wondered if she's really happy when you're not there?" My tone was relaxed, but there was a clear hint of accusation underneath. Andy paused, and his face changed from guarded confidence to pained thought. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly, as if he was afraid to voice the doubts already growing in his mind. I pressed on carefully, recounting an incident from a few weeks earlier when I saw Clara laughing with a friend whose closeness could not be just a coincidence. I mentioned how she had smiled in a way that hinted at hidden secrets, her eyes shining with an unspoken promise. Every word was meant to reflect the closeness they once had while casting a shadow over the trust he had in her. Andy's grip on his cup tightened, and I saw a spark of raw jealousy flash in his eyes, a deep feeling that had long been kept hidden. As our conversation grew deeper, I shared more details I had gathered from my own memories and from the digital clues left by Clara. I mentioned texts and photos she had left behind, hinting at moments that suggested she was growing closer to someone else. I watched as Andy's face showed a mix of disbelief and pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and carried both anger and sorrow. "I never thought. I never imagined she could do this to us." That confession marked a turning point. With every new detail, I fed his growing sense of betrayal, urging him to question not only Clara's faithfulness but also his own self-worth. I reminded him of the times when she had brushed off his worries, when her reassurances felt more like excuses than real answers. I painted a picture of a woman who had slowly grown distant, someone whose love had shifted like the changing phases of the moon. My words were not made up, but a careful selection of events that I knew would hit home with Andy. Over the next few days, our talks became more intense. I arranged subtle meetings that seemed almost by chance, a random encounter at a friend's party, a shared look in a busy hallway, that left Andy filled with questions and doubts. Each time, I made sure the subject of Clara's secretive behavior came up, always hinting that she had more secrets and that her heart might not be entirely hers to give. My words echoed in his mind, slowly breaking down the solid trust he once had. One afternoon, while walking together in a quiet park, I took the chance to bring up the issue directly. The crisp autumn air and the falling leaves created a quiet goodbye to the warmth of summer. I casually said, "I heard she's been spending a lot of time with someone new, someone she completely trusts. Do you ever wonder what she sees in them?" Andy's silence said it all. It was as if my words hit him like a sudden truth. His eyes wandered along the empty paths, lost in memories and regrets, and for a moment, I saw him on the edge of a painful realization. Before long, Andy's inner conflict started to affect his own life. I noticed his texts to Clara became less frequent, and his phone calls more hesitant. The lively man he once was now showed signs of uncertainty. The seeds of jealousy and doubt I had planted were taking root, showing up in small but clear changes in his behavior. The once confident man was now mired in self-doubt, and I sensed his emotional defenses were breaking down. At night, lying awake in the silence of my home, I thought about the delicate balance of my own feelings. I was not immune to the guilt and sorrow that came with setting this plan in motion. Yet, my determination to uncover the truth and regain my own story pushed those moments of regret aside. I had taken on a role that was as dangerous as it was necessary, manipulating the man who was part of this web of lies in order to reveal the full extent of Clara's betrayal. Each day, as I continued to steer Andy's feelings into a storm of jealousy and doubt, I felt fate pulling tighter. The showdown between truth and deception was getting close, and I knew that soon the real nature of the betrayal would be revealed. Andy's growing isolation and his increasing distrust of Clara were all part of a plan meant to break the cycle of lies that had kept us trapped. In my search for the truth, I had become both the planner and the tool of my own revenge, a man driven by the need to reclaim his honor, even if it meant using deception as a weapon. The line between right and wrong had blurred, leaving a clear fact: sometimes, to expose a lie that has festered for years, you must be willing to become part of that very web of deceit. As I kept on down this risky path, every meeting with Andy and every carefully crafted message pushed him closer to his breaking point. The slow erosion of his illusions was like a never-ending descent into jealousy, suspicion, and eventual despair. And in the midst of it all, I watched with a quiet sadness as the man he once was began to disappear, replaced by someone unrecognizable, overwhelmed by the fallout of secrets that had been hidden for too long. After weeks of simmering tension, the moment of explosion finally arrived on a gloomy evening. Every step I took that day felt as if I were balancing on a knife's edge, each moment loaded with the risk of shattering long-held illusions and facing irreversible consequences. I had carefully set a trap of manipulation, stirring up Andy's jealousy and doubt in every conversation, and now it was time to confront the heart of the deception. I arranged one final meeting with Andy in an old, deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place chosen for its isolation and raw atmosphere, mirroring the turbulent emotions inside me. The environment was intentionally stark and cold, where even the faintest breeze seemed to carry echoes of broken promises and hidden truths. Arriving early, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting feelings, a mix of burning anger, deep sorrow, and a detached resolve. I wasn't sure how the confrontation would end, but I knew that nothing short of exposing every lie would be enough. When Andy finally arrived, something had changed in him. The tentative, vulnerable man I had been toying with was gone. Instead, he carried the heavy burden of betrayal. His eyes, once filled with a fragile hope, now burned with a fierce combination of rage and despair. As he moved toward me, the space between us crackled with a silent understanding that any pretense had come to an end. "Michael," he started, his voice thick with emotion, as if he already sensed that I was no longer the person he thought he knew. His tone revealed the inner battle he was fighting, a conflict between clinging to cherished memories and the desperate need to cut ties with a reality filled with pain. I could see his struggle clearly, a silent war between holding on and letting go. I took a steadying breath and spoke. "Andy," I said in a firm, measured tone, "it's time to put everything on the table, no more lies, no more masks. I paused, letting my words sink into the cold air around us, as if the universe itself were pausing for the truth to be released. In that moment, Andy's face shifted ever so slightly, a subtle sign that he understood this was the turning point. "I can't keep living like this," he admitted, his voice breaking as suppressed emotions finally burst forth. "I believed our secret, our plans, meant something real. But now, I feel like it was all just an illusion." His confession was raw and painful, laced with regret and a deep sense of betrayal that went beyond any simple relationship. Unable to hold back any longer, I pressed on. "Andy, please listen," I said, softening my tone just enough for him to grasp my meaning. "This isn't just about your feelings, it's about the life Clara and I have been living, a life built on hidden secrets and deliberate lies. I know you trusted her, believed in a future together, but this wasn't just a casual fling. It was a fully planned double life, and you were a part of that deception." I let each word fall, aimed at shattering the fragile illusions he clung to. As I spoke, Andy's face contorted in pain and disbelief, his eyes brimming with tears he could no longer hold back. "So, you're telling me," he began, struggling for words, "that everything was a lie? That Clara never truly loved me?" His question, simple yet devastating, sliced through the charged air. I hesitated, each word heavy with truth and regret. "I'm saying that the woman you believed in was living a life of deceit. And now, I know the full truth. You deserve to know exactly what happened." At that moment, with Andy falling silent, I realized that our confrontation had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just about exposing Clara's betrayal, it was about dismantling the shared fantasy that had blinded him to the real world. His face, a mirror of shattered dreams and harsh realities, showed how painful it was when secrets finally come to light. Overwhelmed by the truth, Andy's emotions spilled over. He staggered back, clutching his chest as if trying to hold in his heartbreak. "How could you do this?" he whispered, his words more to himself than to me. "How could she, how could you let it continue for so long?" His voice echoed like the remnants of a man who once believed in love's promise, now left with nothing but fragments of sorrow and regret. For a long, agonizing minute, silence reigned. The quiet was thick, punctuated only by the distant sounds of a city that seemed indifferent to our pain. In that heavy silence, I felt not only his anguish but also a deep sorrow for myself, the years lost in complacency and silent acceptance of betrayal. I had set a chain reaction in motion that now spun wildly beyond my control, and in that moment, I questioned if hope could still be found for either of us. Finally, I spoke once more, this time with a raw vulnerability that belied my earlier resolve. "I never meant for any of this to happen," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted the truth, Andy, I needed to understand how we ended up here. But now I see that in seeking answers, I may have only made things worse." My confession hung in the air, a stark admission of my own shortcomings, acknowledging that in our joint pursuit of truth, we had both been caught in a web of deception that had grown far too vast. Andy searched my eyes, as if seeking a shred of sincerity amid the regret. "And now?" he asked, his tone a mix of resignation and fragile hope. "What do we do when the truth feels too heavy to bear?" His simple yet powerful question captured the painful crossroads before us, the choice between living in the ruins of shattered illusions or daring to step into an uncertain future built on the painful but liberating power of truth. The finality of that moment was undeniable. Our confrontation had stripped away every disguise, leaving us raw and exposed in the aftermath of betrayal and regret. I knew the road ahead would be lined with hard choices, not only confronting the lies of the past but also finding a path toward healing. For Andy, it was about picking up the broken pieces of a life once whole. For me, it was about coming to terms with my own part in a story spiraling out of control. As the night deepened and the cold reality of our meeting set in, it was clear we stood at a crossroads. The illusions we had clung to were shattered, leaving only the unvarnished truth behind. "Perhaps," I said softly, "the only way forward is to rebuild, even if we must start from these ruins. My words, hesitant yet heavy with wisdom, reminded us that truth, no matter how painful, is the only true foundation for a future. Andy slowly nodded, the hard lines of his face softening just a little as he accepted there was no escape from the maze of deception we had been caught in. Maybe it's time, he murmured, his voice carrying a fragile note of resolve, to let go of what we once believed and face what really is. In that shared moment of understanding, we both realized that although the road ahead would be filled with sorrow and regret, it might also offer a chance for redemption. Beneath the dim glow of the warehouse, with the chill of the night matching the cold truth of our broken lives, our final confrontation ended. The truths we uncovered were sharp and undeniable, leaving no space for the comforting lies of the past. As I walked away from that meeting, the echoes of that night stayed with me, a solemn reminder that sometimes, reclaiming your dignity and healing means facing the darkest corners of the human heart. And so, with our hearts heavy and our minds burdened by the fallout of deception, we each stepped away into the night, carrying the shattered remnants of a shared past and the uncertain hope of a future built on the delicate, yet freeing, power of truth.